Hi, Chevra, what's cooking? How y'all doing? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Ches, Daf 98 of Masechta Ayruvin. Chevra, if I'm not mistaken, and I might be, but if I'm not mistaken, a week from today we will be celebrating a siyum on Masechta Ayruvin. Pretty crazy. Pretty crazy. Well, before we get ahead of ourselves, today's daf, we talk about what do you do when you have a sefer that rolls off of a threshold of a house? What do you do? What do you do if you have a sefer that rolls off of a roof of a house? Now you might be asking, how is a book rolling? So Rashi points out that the books back then were kind of like our Megillas. Putting things on windowsills, these kind of inyanim we're going to talk about today. You guys going to miss this stuff in a week from now? You're going to miss talking about windowsills and thresholds and walls and doors? Let us know. Chevre, let's go weiter. We're going to learn 3 Mishnayos today. 3 unique Mishnayos today. We will begin with the first one on Daf Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis, about 6 lines, 7 lines maybe from the bottom. If you have a fellow and he was reading a sefer, so again, these svarim are like Megillas, that you roll them up so they can unroll. Okay, so let's say you're reading from a sefer on a threshold to a door. It almost looks to me kind of like a step in front of a door almost, but it's the assumption is that it's 10 tefachim tall and it's 4 tefachim wide, so it's Rishus HaYachid. V'nisgalgal ha-sefer miyado, and the sefer then rolled out of his hands. Now it didn't roll out of his hands entirely. It didn't fall entirely into Rishus HaYachid, because then, into Rishus HaRabim, because then obviously you would be unable to take it from Rishus HaRabim back to where you are on the scope in Rishus HaYachid. Gololo etzlo, yet nonetheless you are allowed to roll it back to yourself. You being on the Rishus, on this iskopa, which is a Rishus HaYachid, you can nonetheless roll this Megillah back to yourself, because you were still holding onto it the entire time. Hayikori Barosh Agag, if you were reading from the Sefer on top of a roof, the roof of course is a Rishus HaYachid, V'nizgalgal ha-sefer miyado ad shelo higia la'asar tefachim godlo etzlo, and again, one part of the sefer rolls out of his hands. He's still holding on to one end, but the other end is now dangling. So it says, Ad shelo higia la'asar tefachim godlo etzlo. As long as the dangling end of the sefer is still above 10 tefachim from the ground, he could roll back up the sefer to him. Mishegia la'asar tefachim, but once the dangling end of the sefer is within 10 tefachim of the ground, hofko al aksav, well then, that's it. Turn it over and leave it dangling until the end of Shabbos. And the Gemara is going to give a little bit more detail in just a little bit. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, afilu ein musulak min haaretz elakim lo machat godelo etzlo. Rabbi Yehuda has a little bit more leeway, and he says as long as the sefer has not touched the ground, right? Even if it's just a needle's worth, but if it has not touched the ground, you can still roll it back to where you are. But once it touches the ground, then it's too late. Reb Shimon Omer, Reb Shimon has the most lenient opinion, afilu ba'aretz atzmo, even if the dangling end of the sefer is actually not dangling at all, it's touching the ground. Gollo etzlo, still you can roll it back to where you are. Shein l'chadavar mishum shvus omid b'fnei kisvei hakodesh, because you don't have anything that is a dirabanan that stands in the way of kisvei hakodesh. What's the dirabanan here? The dirabanan here is that Mikra Din, there's really nothing wrong with it. You're holding it in your hands, right? You're on the roof. The roof is a Rishus HaYachid. You're still holding the sefer. So why can't I roll it back to me? The reason is because we're concerned. We're concerned that if the sefer mamish falls completely out of your hand into the Rishus HaRabim, then you might go and pick it up and bring it back to the roof. So if we say, look, once it touches the Rishus HaRabim, or maybe gets close to touching the Rishus HaRabim, so we say, look, don't bring it back to where you are. But says Reb Shimon, come on, at the end of the day, midoraisa, you're not doing anything wrong by rolling it back towards you, because you're still holding on to it the entire time. So the only reason not to do it is this gezerah, because we're worried that if it does fall out of your hands, then you might go and bring it back to where you are, and that would be a problem. But at the end of the day, what's the other option? The other option is just to flip it over and leave it there till the end of Shabbos. That's bizyon kisvei hakodesh. Right? That's not the way. That's not a proper, respectful way to treat kisvei hakodesh. So therefore, Reb Shimon says, look, if I have to choose between a gezerah of maybe it'll fall out of your hands and it'll come to a problem, but the fact of the matter is that right now it didn't fall out of your hands, or the other option being to and because of that, essentially, then you're going to just be leaving a sefer exposed till the end of Shabbos. Reb Shimon says, look, I'd much rather that you take the roll back up the sefer to where you are and don't worry about the gezerah. The Gemara now wants to know, Hayiskopa Hechidami, what is this threshold? We're talking about a Rishus HaYachid. What are we talking about? Ilema Yiskopa Rishus HaYachid. So if we say that the threshold is a Rishus HaYachid, i.e., it's 10 tefachim tall, 4 tefachim wide, Vikama Rishus HaRabim, and in front of it is Rishus HaRabim. So basically, so the ratio of the Mishnah is talking about where you have a guy who's reading a sefer on this iskopa, which is a Rishus HaYachid. It rolls, one end rolls into Rishus HaRabim. V'lo gazrin dilma nafil v'asi le'asuye. And we're saying, because what did the Mishnah say in the Reisha? It said that in this case, gololo etzlo, you could roll it back to where you are. So apparently on the iskopa, we're not making any kind of a gezerah. Right? We're just saying, if it rolls, one end rolls from your hands, you can roll it back to where you are in the Rishus HaYachid. So money. So then who would be the author who says it? Reb Shimoni. Well, that sounds like Reb Shimon from our sefer, right? The Amar kol davar shu mishum shvus eino amud b'fnei kisvei hakodesh. Any gezerah that you would make, right, which is to say, well, maybe you shouldn't be able to roll back the sefer to where you are, because what if it falls out of your hands completely into Rishus HaRabim, then you might bring it back, right? That gezerah, Rabbi Shimon says we don't make that gezerah when the alternative is to have bizyon kisvei hakodesh, that the sefer is just going to be lying there in disgrace. So fine. So if we say that the reisha of the iskopa is also Reb Shimon, right? Because it's saying you can roll it back to where you are, but ema sefer. What if we continue in the Mishnah? What does it say? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, afilu ein mesulak min haaretz elam lo achut gol lo etzlo. So Rabbi Yehuda says that when you're reading the sefer on the roof and one part dangles into Rishus HaRabim, as long as it never touched the ground, you can roll it back to where you are on the roof. Rabbi Shimon Omer says, Rabbi Shimon afilu ba'aretz atzmo gol lo etzlo. Even if it touches the ground, you would still be able to roll it back to where you are on the roof. So Reisha v'sefer Reb Shimon Mitziyasa Reb Yehuda. So does that really make sense that the Mishnah would start out with Reb Shimon's opinion, and then switch to Reb Yehuda's opinion, and then go back to Reb Shimon's opinion? Reb Yehuda in. So Reb Yehuda says yes, that's exactly what's going on. Reisha v'sefer Reb Shimon Mitziyasa Reb Yehuda. That the first part and the last part of the Mishnah are Reb Shimon, and then that middle part is Reb Yehuda. There's nothing wrong with the fact that we're flipping back and forth. Rabba Omar says Rabba Hocha b'iskopan address askinan umishim bizyon kisvei hakodesh rabbanon. Rabba says no. Actually, the Reisha is not specifically Reb Shimon. It's even according to the rabbis, the consensus opinion, right? And what's unique about the iskopa is that it's a place, this threshold, it's a place where lots of people walk and walk on it and go in and out of the house. So for that reason, even the Chachamim would say, look, it's pretty disgraceful to just leave the, sefer there and have all these people walking in and out of the iskopa with the sefer overturned on it. So therefore we say, look, don't worry about the gezerah in that case and just roll it up to where you are. Eisve Abaye asks a kasha on Rabbah. Toch dalid amis gololo etzlo chutz dalid hofko al ksav. So apparently there's a brisa. Rashi says he doesn't know where this brisa is, but apparently Abaye is bringing a brisa that actually, when it comes to this iskopa, so you have a fellow and he's reading from a sefer on the threshold, the sefer then rolls out of his hands into Rishus HaRabim. He's still holding on to it on one end, but the other end kind of rolled into Rishus HaRabim. So this brisa is saying, well, it depends. If the loose end is within 4 amas of you, so then you could roll it back. If the loose end is extended further than 4 amas, well, then you cannot roll it back. Now, now, Rabba, if you're correct that we're talking about an iskopa that is a rishus hayachid, but the thing is that lots of people, walk on it. So mali toch dalet amis, mali chutz la'arba amis. Well, then what's the nafkamina between if the loose end of the scroll is within 4 amis or further than 4 amis? Because according to you, Rabbah, we're talking about an iskopa that's a rishus hayachid, and it's rolling in to rishus harabim. That's some deoraisa rishuyas right there, right? That so that's some deoraisa rishuyas right there, right? If it goes from this iskopa, which is rishus hayachid, into the rishus harabim, right? And still we're saying it's okay, you can roll it back to you because of people walk there. Well then, what's the difference if it rolls to within 4 amas or if it rolls further than 4 amas? Meaning, they're both deoraisas, right? There's both potential deoraisas, right? Taking something, because what's the concern? The concern is it might fall into the Rishus HaRabim, and then you'll bring it from the Rishus HaRabim back to the iskopa, which is the Rishus HaYachid, and we're concerned for that, so therefore, we say don't roll it back. But because of bizayon of the Kisvei HaKodesh, we say don't worry, lots of people walk there, it'll be a bizayon, you can roll it back to where you are. What should be any different if the loose end is within 4 amos or outside of 4 amos? Because what would be the problem with 4 amos? Well, I guess we'd be concerned that if it's further away than 4 amos, if it falls outside of there, you might then take it back to where you are and you'll carry dalet amos b'rishus harabim. That's also an Isser de'oraisa. So why would we be concerned about the Isser de'oraisa about ha'avara, dalet amos, and say, look, if it's more than 4 amos away, you won't be able to roll it back to where you are because we're concerned that if it falls outside of 4 amos, then you might carry 4 amos rishus hayachid in rishus harabim. So why are we concerned about that? Yet if it's within 4 amos, we're not concerned that maybe you'll take it from rishus harabim into rishus hayachid, which was also an Isser de'oraisa. So therefore, Amar Abaye, rather says Abaye, here we're talking about an iskopa that is a carmelis, actually. That it is, 4 tfachim wide, but it's not quite 10 tfachim tall. So Rishus HaRabim overes lefanea, and in front of it is Rishus HaRabim. Now, transferring from Rishus HaRabim to a carmelis is an Isser D'Rabbanan. So Toch Daled Amis, so according to Abaye, if the loose end of the scroll is within 4 amis, well then, the inafil umaisile lo asli de chiyuv chatas, that if it falls out of your hands and you end up bringing it back into where you are on the iskopa, it's not a chiyuv chatas, because it's only midrabanan to bring something from Rishus HaRabim to an iskopa, to a carmelis. So Sharulei Rabbanan. So Rabbanan don't make the gezerah over there, and they say, look, if there's lots of people walking there, and it'll be bizayon, so therefore you can roll it back to where you are. Chutz la'arba amos di maisile asli de chiyuv chatos lo Sharulei Rabbanan. But if the loose end is more than 4 amos away, that if it falls over there and you bring it back to the iskopa, you're going to carry it 4 amos from Rishus HaRabim, which is an Isser D'Oraisa. Therefore, in that case, the rabbis say, look, just leave it there, and they make a gezerah and say that out of concern that we don't want you to maybe end up walking 4 amos if it falls, just leave it there, even though it'll be a bizayon. So that is Abaye's opinion. Abaye says that the iskopa is a carmelis. If that's the case, toch daled amas nami nigzor domim ayel rishus harabim rishus hayachid. But one second, Abaye, why is your suggestion so amazing? even if the loose end is within 4 amos, right? So sure, if you bring it from Rishus Harabim into the iskopa, that would only be in Isser D'Rabbanan, sure. But if it falls into Rishus Harabim, you might take it from Rishus Harabim and then go from the threshold into your house. And your house is a Rishus HaYachid, so you'll end up carrying it from Rishus Harabim to Rishus HaYachid, and that is an Isser D'Oraisa. So shouldn't we make the Gzeira there and say that you'd be unable to roll back to where you are in the Iskopa out of concern that if it falls into Rishus Harabim, you might bring it into Rishus HaYachid? V'chitema kevin demafsakas karmelis leis lanba. And if you're going to say, well, but the karmelis is in the middle, right? Meaning, if it falls into Rishus Harabim, you're gonna have to pick it up, go by way of the threshold, which is a karmelis, and then get into Rishus Harabim. But that wouldn't, and then get into Rishus HaYachid inside of your house. But that wouldn't be a good suggestion, because going by way of another Rishus doesn't really make a difference. That if somebody carries an item 4 amas in Rishus Harabim, ve'aviro derech olav, but he held it over his head, i.e. in a makom p'tur, chayav, you're nonetheless going to be chayav, because you didn't stop, it didn't rest in the makom p'tur. So, therefore, the same thing would be here, right? So Rava says, if you carry something 4 amas in Rishus Harabim, and you're holding it over your head, so it's traveling, so you're basically picking it up in Rishus Harabim, it's then traveling through a makom p'tur, then you're putting it down 4 amas later in Rishus Harabim. Rava says that you're still going to be chayiv, since it never actually landed in a makom p'tur. So here also, we'd say the same thing. Even though there's a threshold in the middle, if you pick up something in Rishus Harabim, if you pick up this sefer that fell in Rishus Harabim, you then go by way of the threshold into Rishus HaYachid, into your house, it's going to make no difference because you didn't stop on the threshold. So the Gemara answers, so the Gemara answers here, it's talking about a threshold that is very wide, right? It's not just 4 tvachim, it's like a very wide threshold. That while he's walking on the threshold, he'll remember and he'll stop, and, either he won't bring it into Rishus HaYachid, or he'll, make sure to stop on the threshold so that it will have landed in the karmelis, and it wouldn't be an Isser D'Oraisa. V'iba Isema, or if you want, I will say, L'olam B'iskopa she'en arucha, or you could say it's, talking about a threshold that's really just 4 tvachim wide. V'stam kisvei HaKodesh ayunim ma'ayin bu, umanachlu. But kisvei HaKodesh, they're very interesting. So the Maisa, even if it falls into Rishus Harabim, you'll pick it up, and you'll be walking into your house by way of the threshold, and you're going to find something interesting, and you're going to stop on the threshold. But why? Maybe let's be concerned that maybe you'll find something interesting when you're still in Rishus Harabim, and then you will have already read that interesting thing, and then you're going to walk straight from Rishus Harabim through the threshold into your house without stopping. So Hamani ben Azai, well, this is the opinion of Ben Azai, who says that walking is like you're standing, meaning even if you walk from Rishus Harabim by way of the Karmelis into Rishus HaYachid without stopping, nonetheless, it would be as if you did stop on the threshold, which is a Karmelis. So V'dilma Zarik Lu Mizarik, but maybe he'll throw it from Rishus Harabim into the Rishus HaYachid. Dam Reb Yochanan Mod Ben Azai B'Zorik, that Reb Yochanan says that Ben Azai nonetheless admits that if you throw something, it would be a problem. So if you threw it from Rishus Harabim to Rishus HaYachid, it would be a problem, even though it went by way of the Iskopa, which is a Karmelis. Amar Ravada Bar Hava, Zosomeres in Mizarkin Kisvei HaKodesh. Well, from here you see that we don't throw Kisvei HaKodesh, therefore we can assume that he's not throwing it, and also if he were to walk, so then it would be considered as though he stopped. So that is why it would be acceptable. So says Abaye, it's talking about where the threshold is a Karmelis, and therefore, and we're not, even if, so if he brings the Sefer, even if it falls into the Rishus Harabim, if he brings it to where he is in the Karmelis, it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan, and we're not concerned that he's going to take it from the Rishus Harabim to the Rishus HaYachid, to inside of his house, because, he will have to either stop in the middle on the threshold, or it's like Ben Azai who says that, even if you don't stop, it's as if you stopped. So that is why you'd be able to roll it in from the from, if it falls into Rishus Harabim. If it's within 4 amos, you'd be able to roll it into where you are by the threshold. Says the Gemara, the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, Yekori B'rosh Hagag V'chulei. If a person was reading on the top of a roof and the sefer dangled down, so it says that what you do is you flip it over. If it's within 10 tfachim, or according to Tanakama, or according to Rabbi Yehuda, if it touches the ground, so then you just flip it over on the writing side, so that the writing side is face down and people don't see it. It's not facing Rishus Harabim, and then you leave it till after Shabbos. So, Umishari, are you allowed to take a sefer and just flip it over like that? We learn in a brayso, kosvei svarim tefillin umezuzis. Those scribes who write Sifrei Torah, Tefillin and Mezuzis, right? A sofer stam, right? The stam, of course, stands for Svarim, Tefillin and Mezuzis. Lo itiru lo'ed la'afoch yireh al ponel. So they are not allowed to flip over the parchment on its face. So leporis aleas habeget. Rather, what you do is you spread, you cover it with a cloth rather than flip it over. So how come over here we're flipping over this sefer? So the Gemara answers, that over there, in the case by the sofer stam, so I don't know, he's probably working in his office or something when he's done working for the day, so he takes something and he covers it up with it, like he has things available to him. Here, we don't have a cloth available, so therefore, the best we can do is flip it over. And if you don't flip it over, it's going to be even more disgraceful than it already is. So that is why in this situation, we recommend just flipping it over and doing the best you can. Says the Gemara. But 1 second, when it's within 10 tefachim of the ground, so the Tanakama says you flip it over. But why should you have to flip it over? It didn't land in the Rishus Harabim, it's just dangling. So Rava says we're talking about a wall that is slanted, and therefore when it hits to within 10 tefachim, it's actually landing on the wall, the slanted wall, within 10 tefachim of the ground. And because it's not so simple to understand why that would be a problem, but because the wall, it's within 10 tefachim of the ground, so I guess it's considered like Rishus Harabim. Why isn't it a makom p'tur? Apparently it's not so simple, but it could be that slanted walls are special. Or maybe it could be because people would put their loads on it because it's near Rishus Harabim. Okay. Well, it's like right by Rishus, right? It's a wall in Rishus Harabim. Fine. Amar le Abai says to Rava, "B'mayu kimto lemasnisin b'koso meshupa." 1 second, Rava, you're saying that the Mishnah is talking about a slanted wall, and that when the Tanakama says that if the dangling part of the scroll is within 10 tefachim, it's landing on a slanted wall. Ema Seifa. I'll tell you the continuation of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, afilu einu musulak min haaretz elam lo achud golo etzlo. V'anachle. Rabbi Yehuda says, as long as the dangling part of the scroll has not touched the ground, even if it's just a needle's amount separating it in the ground, but as long as it hasn't touched the ground, you could bring it back to where you are. But if we're talking about a slanted wall, then mistama is resting on the wall. So my answer is the Mishnah is missing a few words. Add the following words and learn it. When do we say that if it falls into 10 tfachim, you need to just flip it over and leave it? So b'kosel meshupa, that's talking about a slanted wall where it landed on the wall. Aval b'kosel she'eno meshupa, if it's just a flat wall, i.e. the scroll didn't land on anything, it's just dangling. L'mayla mishlosha gololo etzlo l'mata mishlosha hofko ala ksav. So if it's dangling above 3 tfachim, well then you can roll it back up to where you are. If it's within 3 tfachim of the ground, well then, it's going to be considered like part of the ground, and you have to flip it over and leave it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, afilu eino mesulak min haaretz v'chulei. Right? Rabbi Yehuda says, no, even if it's more than 3, even if it's less than 3 tfachim, meaning there's less than 3 tfachim from the dangling end to the ground, and Rabbi Yehuda says still you'd be able to roll it back to you as long as it hasn't touched the ground. To be on anacha agabe mashu, because we need it to land on something. But 1 second, that which Rava says, toch shlosha l'rabbanan tzarich hanacha, that Rava says in Masechta Shabbos on Daf Kuf, Daf Kuf Aleph, Daf Kuf, also apparently Daf Pei. Okay, fine. They say that within 3 Tvachim, it's not considered like it hits the ground yet, and Mamish has to land. So, well, let's say it's actually not so simple. It's a machlokas tanoim, because we see over here that the Tanakama says that once it reaches within 3 Tvachim, it's considered like it landed on the ground already. So how come Rava is saying, so when Rava says that according to the rabbis, it would have to land on something within 3 Tvachim, well, apparently not everybody agrees with that. So Ella rather cooler Rabbi Yehuda. It's all Rabbi Yehuda. Chavi, you ready for this? It's missing even more words, and this is how you have to say it. When do we say that if it's within 10 Tfachim? So then you just have to flip it over and leave it. Because of Meshupa, that's talking about when the wall is slanted. Aval, because of She'eno Meshupa, but if it's a wall that is straight and the scroll is dangling, even if there's less than 3 Tvachim from the end of the scroll to the ground, just roll it back to where you are. Because Rabbi Yehuda says, even if it's only separated from the ground a needle's worth, you can still roll it back to where you are. My time, how come to be because you need it to land on something, and as long as it hasn't landed on something, you can still roll it back to where you are. To which Reb Shimon says, even if it lands on the ground, you could still roll it back to where you are, because the consideration of the thought of Bizyon Kisvei HaKodesh is unfathomable, and will not be we're not going to be Mavaza Kisvei HaKodesh out of concern that maybe it will fall completely into Rishus HaRabim. Chevra, we get to a new Mishnah, a Mishnah about a windowsill. Can you put things on windowsills on Shabbos, right? If you are in your house and outside your window there is like a windowsill that is over Rishus HaRabim, can you put things on it? Well, let's see. Ziz shalifnei chalon. So if you have a windowsill, no sein olav v'notlin mimenu b'Shabbos. Well, you could put things on it. You could take things off of it on Shabbos. Says the Gemara, haziz the mapik lehecha. Now, what's on the other side of the windowsill? What are the stakes over here? If something were to fall from the windowsill, where would it be falling into? If on the other side of the windowsill is Rishus HaRabim, well, shouldn't we be concerned that if something falls off of the windowsill, it will land in Rishus HaRabim, and then maybe you'll go and pick it up and bring it back into your house, and that will be a problem? Okay, fine. So the other side of the windowsill is just a Rishus HaYachid, maybe like your chatzar or something. Well, then pshita, then obviously you could put things from inside your house onto your windowsill. What's the worst that'll happen? It'll fall into Rishus HaYachid, no big deal. So Amar Abaye says, Le'olam demapik Rishus HaRabim. So Abaye says, no, really it's talking about that the other side is Rishus HaRabim. Umaynos and Olav, Dikatane. Well then, why are you allowed to put things on it? Or shouldn't we be concerned that it'll fall into Rishus HaRabim? Kelim Hanishbarim. You can put things that can break. So for example, glass and pottery, things that if they fall, they're going to shatter and you're not going to bring them back. But things that will fall and you'll pick up, yeah, that would be a concern. Tanya, we learn in a brayse. Tanya Namiyachi, we also learn in a brayse like this. Ziz shelifnei chalin, when you have like a windowsill, hayotze Rishus HaRabim, that goes out to Rishus HaRabim on the other side. Nosnin olive kairis v'chosis kitonius v'tzlochius. You could put on it plates and cups and different kinds of pitchers, things that if they fall, they'll break. Umishtamish b'chol hakosel, and you can use the entire windowsill ad asara tachtonim, as long as it is not within 10 tefachim of the ground, right? So what's this windowsill? The windowsill is basically you take like, I don't know, a sheet of wood, a board of wood, and you put it outside your window. But the interesting thing over here is that the wood is wider than the window, right? So you have a window, let's say it's 10 tefachim wide, and let's say you have a board of wood that is 20 tefachim long, let's say, and you put that outside as your windowsill, and so like the middle 10 tefachim is by your window, and then let's say you have 5 tefachim on either side, okay? So, now if you have another board of wood below the board of wood that's outside your window, mishtamish bo, so you can use the lower board, But with the upper board, you're only able to use the area that is opposite the window. Now, what's the deal with this upper board, with this upper windowsill? Why are you only allowed to use the part that is opposite the window, but not the parts, the extensions that go beyond the window? If the width of the windowsill is less than 4 tfachim, well, makom pturhu. Well, then, if the board has a width that's less than 4 tfachim, well, then it will be a makom ptur, right? If it's less than 4 tfachim, it's makom ptur. And then the Gemara wants to say that if it's a makom ptur, then you shouldn't be allowed to use it at all, even opposite the window. Now, you might be thinking, isn't the whole thing with a makom ptur that you're allowed, it's a makom ptur, even, right? You can put things from Rishus HaYachid and from Rishus HaRabim on it. So you're right. But that is sort of in a temporary fashion, as Rashi points out. So if you're in Rishus HaRabim and there's like a place that's, less than 4 by 4, so you can put stuff down on it. But we wouldn't suggest that you should have a windowsill where you're constantly putting things on it, and it's less than 4 tfachim. It's too risky because things can fall off of it and then too easily, and then you'll end up bringing it back. So if it's less than 4 tfachim, so then it's a makom ptur, and certainly you wouldn't even be able to use the part that's opposite the window. And if the width is 4 tfachim, well, then you should be able to use the entire board, even the extensions. So Amar Abaye, tachton de'izbei arba'a. So Abaye says, look, the lower board has 4 tfachim. The elyon leizbei arba'a. The top board, the top windowsill, does not have a width of 4 tfachim. V'chalono mashlimasu l'daled. But the interesting thing is that, however, if you add the thickness of the window, then you get to 4 tfachim. So let's say this windowsill was 3 tfachim wide, but the window itself was 1 tefach wide. So then, when you add them together, it's 4 tfachim. So now, the part that's opposite the window, when you add the thickness of the window plus the thickness of the board, you'll get a total of 4 tfachim, so that part you can use. But so keneged chalon mishtamish, the chore chalon hu, because it's just considered like the sides of the chalon. The haigisa nami haigisa aser. But the parts of the windowsill on either side of the window, i.e. like the extensions, well, that's just 3 tfachim wide, and that's unusable. So that is why you can use the part of the windowsill that is opposite the window. Chevre, our third and final Mishnah of the day. Interesting. A person can be standing in Rishus HaYachid and lean over to Rishus HaRabim and move things around. As long as it's less than 4 amis, you can move things around in Rishus HaRabim. Just don't bring them into Rishus HaYachid. Rishus HaRabim, Metaltal Rishus HaYachid. And you can be standing in Rishus, I don't know what I just said, but if you're in Rishus HaYachid, you can move things around in Rishus HaRabim, and if you're in Rishus HaRabim, you can move things around in Rishus HaYachid. Just don't bring them from one to the other. Don't cross the line. And as long as you don't take it out of 4 amis, I assume that's talking about if you're in Rishus HaYachid and you're moving things around in Rishus HaRabim, don't move them more than 4 amis. Fine. And certainly don't bring them inside to where you are. Lo yamod adam b'Rishus HaYachid v'yashtim b'Rishus HaRabim. Don't, I guess this is probably more for the men. A man shouldn't stand in Rishus HaYachid and pish into Rishus HaRabim, and he also shouldn't stand in Rishus HaRabim and pish into Rishus HaYachid. Okay? V'chein lo yarok. And similarly, don't spit. Alright? Very nice. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, af mishenit las roko befiv lo yahalech arba amos ad sheyarok. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda says that even if you haven't actually spit yet, but you're getting ready. It's mamish. All the only thing that needs to be done is you just gotta spit it out of your mouth. Well, at that point, you also shouldn't walk 4 amos until you spit. All right. So Rav Chinan bar Shlamya was teaching Chiya bar Rav in front of Rav. I feel like we have all sorts of people who were teaching Chiya bar Rav in front of Rav. Rav Yehuda a number of times. I think Davka, like the first daf of Masechta Ayruvin, Rav Yehuda was teaching something to Chiya bar Rav. Yeah, there it is. Beis and Beis, all the way at the bottom. Right? There's a few different people, students of, I think maybe Rav Chiya bar Ashi, maybe. Akoponim. So here we have Rav Chanina bar Shlamya is teaching Chiya bar Rav Mishnayos in front of Rav. And he says, Lo ya'amud adam b'rshus ha'yachid v'yitalta b'rshus ha'rabim. You shouldn't stand in Rishus ha'yachid and move things around in Rishus ha'rabim. Amle shavakta rabbanim v'avadta Rav Meir. Rav says, Ma pitom. Like, the Mishnah says that you are allowed to. How come you're saying that you're not allowed to? Apparently there's going to be a machlokas between Rav Meir and the Chacham about this that we're going to see soon, where Meir says that you're not allowed to stand in Rishus ha'yachid and move things around Rishus ha'rabim. So Rav says, why are you neglecting the opinion of the rabbis and instead holding like Rav Meir? So the Gemara answers, who savar mide sefer Rav Meir, reishanam Rav Meir, that since the sefer that we haven't learned yet is Rav Meir, so you figure that this Mishnah was also Rav Meir. And I guess you could choose whichever way you want. I don't know. But certainly, he was assuming that it was not a machlokas between the Chacham and Rav Meir. V'lo sefer Rav Meir v'reish Rabbanan. The fact of the matter is that our Mishnah was the rabbis, the opinion that argues on Rav Meir, which is interesting. Meaning, we're not going to say Stam Mishnah Rav Meir over here. We're going to say that I guess it's the rabbi's opinion. And therefore, Rav corrected Rav Chanina bar Shlamya to say that you would be able to stand in Rishus HaYachid and move things around in Rishus HaRabim. Chevre, that was Daf Tzadi Ches of Masechta Ayruvin. I hope you enjoyed it. Let us review some of the things that we learned. We talked about what do you do when a sefer rolls off from a threshold into Rishus HaRabim. So Yehuda says that, the Mishnah had said that you can roll it back to where you are on the threshold. So the question is why? So if Yehuda said, well, it's Reb Shimon's opinion, who says that we don't make any gezeras when we're concerned about Bizyon Kisvei HaKodesh. Rabbah says, well, it's talking about a threshold where lots of people are walking over there. So even the Chacham would say that you would be allowed to roll it back because there it would be a very big bizayon if people are walking around with this sefer exposed over there, lying there. Abai says that we're talking about a threshold that is a carmelis, and therefore you're allowed to roll it back to where you are, because what's the worst that'll happen? It'll fall out of your hands completely, and you'll bring it back to the threshold, which is only an Issur D'Rabbanan anyway, so in that case it's acceptable. What happens when a sefer rolls off of a roof? So Rabbi Yehuda says, well, it depends. If the wall is slanted, and the sefer is going to land on the slanted wall, well then so once it lands within 10 tefachim of the ground, so then you would be unable to roll it back to where you are. But if it's a straight wall and it's just dangling, as long as it hasn't yet touched the ground, you can roll it back to where you are. Reb Shimon says even if it touches the ground, you can roll it back to where you are. We talked about putting things on a windowsill. Can you take something from inside your house and put it on the windowsill? The conclusion was essentially, if it's something that if it falls off, it'll break, then yeah, you could put it there. Otherwise, you shouldn't. Alright, and then we talked at the end about how you can move things around. You can stand in Rishus HaYachid and move things around in Rishus HaRabim, stand in Rishus HaRabim, move things around in Rishus HaYachid. Just don't, bring them from one Rishus to the other, or don't move something more than Dal Rabbos from Rishus HaRabim. Peace.